Okay, recording. Good morning, thank you for watching. Today I will answer questions that were asked to me at the Temple Open House for the Philadelphia Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Sorry. Before I start getting into the questions, I just want to let you know you have a rare opportunity if you live near one of our temples that's being opened to go see the inside without becoming a member. One thing that really sunk in is all of the temple open houses have in common the goal of getting people a chance to see the temple. But they are run in slightly different ways depending on how busy we expect it to be. I went to the Montreal Temple last year, and you had a guide who walked with you and did the talking. And I'm guessing that's because they didn't expect it to be extremely busy. And I don't know to what degree that is, because that temple open house was because of a renovation. The temple had already been built, and we already had the open house right after construction. But there was a leak or something like that. A lot of work needed to be done on the inside, and so it needed to be rededicated. And an open house was had before it was rededicated. And in Philadelphia, we had people stationed in the rooms, the volunteers, and that volunteer in that room gave you a short talk, a short explanation about that room, except for the days I wasn't there for it, but we got really busy on weekends and holidays, and one of the other volunteers told me that they went silent sometimes when it was extremely busy, which meant don't make the speech, just let the people see it, say thank you, and please make room for the next group because it's busy, and they kept it moving. I've never been to one of the open houses in Utah where there are a lot of us. I've heard that in the Payson, Utah temple, because of how many people were coming through, there were no people giving any speeches. They just kept everyone moving. A continuous line weaving through the rooms of the temple. I've gone to the Las Vegas, Nevada temple open house. That was 30 years ago. And I don't remember if there were people giving talks, or speeches, or if we just kept moving. I do remember putting the foot coverings on. I remember walking up the stairs in that temple. Don't remember any specific rooms, what they looked like. And I remember seeing the temple surrounded by protesters. Alright, so some of these questions are going to be questions about temples in general, and some were specific to the Philadelphia temple. I'm just going to mix all those questions together. I got home from volunteering and I wrote down the questions. Sometimes I didn't remember until the next day. So all these questions are with a few hours for me to forget the exact wording, but I'm sure I got the meaning of the question or the point they were getting at right. One question that I got asked was, why did it take so long? Before I answered that question, I wanted to clarify with the person what they meant. Because they could have meant, you announced it 5 years ago. Why did it take 5 years to build this thing? Or she could have meant, this city has been it's been around. The current city of Philadelphia as a American city or a English colony that still was there and became an American city since the 1600s. Maybe it wasn't until the 1700s that Philadelphia was founded, but at least the 1700s. And Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has been around since the 1800s. What took you so long? That's a very reasonable question. One thing I've got to give people credit to, all the questions I got were reasonable, respectful questions. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if any of the protesters were going to come up to me and ask rude questions, or if people were going to ask rude questions they got from the protesters outside the temple. If you're wondering why it took us so long to build one of our temples in any of the cities that we have a temple now, or why there's a city that doesn't have a temple, and it's an old city and a lot of people are in that city, and you're wondering why, here's the answer. The temple, since it's a place only members of the church are allowed to enter, we build it where we have us Mormons. So when there's a big city that doesn't have us yet, then we don't try to build a temple there. And so Philadelphia didn't get a temple in the 1800s because there weren't a lot of us in Philadelphia. And at some point in the 1800s, everyone that was in Philadelphia gathered to Utah, and we only recently started to have enough of us to make sense to build the temple. What is the difference between the two buildings? The Philadelphia temple has a meeting house across the street from it. So somebody, when they ask me this question, they could point their hands in opposite directions and be pointing at two buildings with nothing in between them and the buildings. I've already done one long video on this. I'll give a short answer. The short answer I gave to people when they asked about this, and they weren't expecting or planning or hoping for a long answer, is this. Temple, members in good standing only. Chapel, anyone. During the open house, you get to come visit the temple. But after the dedication, then it's only members in good standing. That chapel, at the time we had the Philadelphia Temple open house, the chapel wasn't being used yet as a chapel. Because we had a lot of the rooms set up for the temple open house. And what I mean by that is, there was one room that we called the command center, where there was a radio that could talk to security. We had radios inside of the temple, so they could radio out for security or the medical volunteers. The first day I was there, one of the volunteers had some problems with blood sugar fluctuations, and they radioed out for help. And the command center is where the volunteers checked in and got their assignment, got their little name tag that didn't have their name on it, but identified them as one of the official volunteers helping at the temple. So people that are visiting the temple would know who to ask if they need help, or if they're confused, if they were lost or something. And the other rooms in the temple, and there was one room in the temple that was we always had medical volunteers, people who had medical training, anything from EMT to doctors, and all the different variations in between. Nurses of different kinds were encouraged to be medical volunteers, so that we would have somebody with medical training there when we were expecting a lot of people to come through in case somebody had a medical problem. It wouldn't just be a kind-hearted Good Samaritan that didn't know what they were doing trying to help them. We would have a real EMT or nurse or doctor helping somebody who had a medical problem. And the other rooms were full of chairs with a DVD player ready to play a DVD giving an introduction of the temple. Now, instead of taking down all the chairs, moving to DVD players, we just, decided not to use that building as a chapel until And they did the same thing in Montreal. In Montreal, the chapel wasn't a new chapel. So for that weekend that I was there, and maybe for the whole month that they're having the open house, the congregation that usually met in the chapel that shared a parking lot with the temple got to meet somewhere else. Okay, so the other differences I gave when I gave my short explanation about differences between the temple and the chapel. In the chapel, there's a basketball court. And we never do sports in the temple. And maybe I could have also pointed out, anytime you hear us talking about doing something for the dead, something that helps the dead, we do it in the temple, not in the chapel. Okay. And yeah, one person was listening to my explanation, and I didn't speak clearly, I guess, the first time. And they said, so you don't worship every week? Because I was talking about how we go to the temple as often as our occasion or our circumstances permit us. And we used to have to go all the way to Washington, D.C., which was a 3-hour drive each way. So you needed to have all day available for going to the temple. And we worship every week. We perform ordinances, or in other words, religious rituals, in both the temple and the chapel. So they're both used for worshiping, but it is different ordinances done in each. The one that we do every week on Sunday, we do in the chapel, or the meeting house, the one that visitors can come to. Okay. Most of our temples, and the Philadelphia temple is one of them, that has an angel statue on the top. And I got in a question about that statue. It's a fact that we believe that Joseph Smith Jr. was visited by many angels as part of God using him to found the church. Included in those angels is an angel named Moroni, who was the one who showed him where the Book of Mormon was, the original copy written on gold, etched into gold. And we believe Moroni is in the Bible. The Bible doesn't use his name Moroni. So I didn't say that. Somebody's yelling at their electronic device right now. It doesn't say Moroni in the Bible. I didn't say it says Moroni. But there is an angel in Revelations chapter 14 that God uses to spread the gospel, to proclaim the gospel. And we believe Moroni is the fulfillment of those verses. It's verse 6 or 7. Okay, was it built from scratch or a pre-existing building that got renovated? The Philadelphia temple was built from scratch. The church bought a parking lot, not a parking garage, just flat ground, bought it to build the temple on. Most of our temples are built from scratch, but there have been temples where a pre-existing building was renovated and turned into a temple. The newest temple in Provo, Utah is an example of that. If I'm remembering, the Vernal, Utah temple was a pre-existing building that was not being used as a temple. And the New York City, the Manhattan temple is another example of a temple that was a pre-existing building. Let's see, wedding reception. I was asked about wedding receptions. The Philadelphia temple has a building right next to it. The Philadelphia temple has a lot bigger than I expected it to be. Parking garage under it. And a building next to the temple that is connected to the parking garage. So people that aren't allowed to go into the temple but are there to be at the temple, not just they work a couple blocks away in one of those buildings in Philadelphia. Perhaps somebody would do that if they just want to meditate near the temple, but they aren't allowed to go into it. Maybe they have a friend or family member who is getting married in the temple, or doing one of the other ordinances in the temple, but they can't go into the temple, but they still want to be near the temple. This building near the temple is right now officially called the Arrival Center. If I had to guess, I'm guessing it's going to become a visitor center. But right now, it's not an official visitor center. It's just the Arrival Center. Somebody asked about would wedding receptions be held there? I had never heard of a wedding reception being held in a temple visitor center. I've never heard of it, so to the best of my knowledge it doesn't happen. Usually we use our chapels for that, our meeting houses, and that's where, let's see, when my older brother got married, I was a full-time missionary, right on the same spot of ground, well, not this square footage of ground, but the same region where I am now recording this, which is on the other side of the continent from where my older brother got married. So I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but he probably did it the usual traditional Mormon way, which is get married in the temple and then use the chapel or meeting house for the wedding reception. I'm certain my younger brother did that. I was there for his wedding. They did it the same day. Since I had to drive 3 hours to get to the temple, 3 hours to get back, when I got married, my wife and I got married on a Wednesday, and then on a Saturday, in the chapel closer to home, we had our wedding reception. Let's see. Are the ushers from the area? Usher is what the tags said that identified you as a volunteer, the official volunteers helping out at the temple. When you go to an LDS temple open house, those who are there helping and ushering will be people drawn from the local area. When I went to Montreal, I was only going to be there a couple of days, but I still sent an email volunteering to spend all of my vacation time helping out at the temple open house, and I got nothing back. So I guess they had enough help without needing an American to speak French with an American accent and confuse the people. And but the volunteers are going to be from the area. There was one person I met who came from Utah to be one of the temple open house volunteers. He had lived in this area previously, though. When I first met him, he was living in this area and came out for that. So there are some exceptions to that rule about the usher, but I think the person was wondering if the church has like a temple usher team that goes to all of the temples and to do these open houses. And that's a reasonable question, but we don't have like a group that is at every temple open house that, you know, travels from wherever they are to that temple open house. You might see a few people who like the other volunteer, and there might be a general authority that might come to see the temple. I'm not sure how many architects the church has on staff. The church does have some kind of architectural group or a group of architects that are church members, that are church employees. And so you might see them come out. But for the most part, the volunteers at the temple are people from that area where the temple is. Okay. One person asked me which building would weddings be done in. Bear in mind there's just a meeting house and temple across the street from each other. because some people's families might not be able to enter the temple, so would a chapel be used so family can attend? The way I explained it to him was it's better if you get married in the temple, but you could get married in the chapel. And that was an accurate description, but that didn't explain why it's better. When you hear Mormons talk about eternal families and being together forever, and having a marriage that does not end at death, those marriages take place in the temple. So, we believe somebody who could go to the temple to get married, but doesn't go to the temple, and then dies before they get to the temple, probably. God's going to be the final judge. He knows everything that's happening in their hearts and in their lives. But if they could have gotten to the temple to get married and they didn't, they might have blown their chance to have an eternal family. If somebody gets married out of the temple, even if they're members of the church, it does not make it an eternal marriage. A marriage in a Latter-day Saint meeting house, we believe, gets the same results as if the people went to the big Catholic basilica that you can see from the Philadelphia Temple, or any other Catholic or Protestant or Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim or atheist building for a marriage. And that result is, at death, the marriage is done. The husband and wife are no longer married when they die. And we believe that about a marriage that does not take place in any kind of a religious setting, but is done by a justice of the peace or at City Hall. So if somebody has family that won't be able to go into the temple, they can still be outside of the temple to meet the people when they're done with the wedding. And if it's an extremely hot or cold place, a lot of the temples have visitor centers, and every temple has a lobby in it where people could wait if there's some, I guess it's possible for the lobby to become too full of people if there's a person that's got a lot of close friends and family that aren't allowed into the temple. But waiting in the lobby or in a visitor center, if there is one, is one option for those people. And the wedding reception. Wedding reception is never in the temple. We only use the temple for the wedding. So the wedding reception is a chance for people to be a part of it. My wife and I waited to exchange rings. Wedding rings have nothing to do with the LDS temple wedding ceremony. If you know somebody who walks out of the temple with the wedding ring on, it was because after they were married, the person in the temple doing the marriage says, if you've got rings, you could exchange them now. Something like that. So they're already husband and wife, and then if you want to give each other rings, now you can. My wife and I did the ring exchanging in front of our friends and family because we had an extremely small number of people who were at our marriage, partly because how far away we were from my family, partly because she had a very few people in her family who were members of the church. Okay, here's a specific question about the Philadelphia Temple. The granite exterior came from Maine. Maine is where the granite was quarried for the temple, and it was cut to size in Quebec, Canada. I think it was in or near Montreal, but somewhere in Canada. Let's see. Are there funerals in temples? No, we never use the temple for funerals. Our meeting houses are sometimes used for funerals. I've been to a few of those that were in the meeting houses. And then I've known members of the church who had the funeral in just a funeral home. It's got no connection to the church. We don't believe that the funeral affects what happens in the spirit world or their next life. because that's what other people are doing to them. And we do believe a Mormon who is endowed, watch my video about Mormon Lincoln, know what that means, should be buried in certain clothing. If they aren't buried in that clothing because other people ignored their request or didn't know, nothing bad's going to happen to them. I'm not sure if it's even a big enough problem with God if they said to not be buried in that clothing. I'm not sure. Let's see. How close are other temples? This answer is going to vary depending on which temple you're talking about. You know, when the Johannesburg, South Africa temple was built, it was the first temple in all of Africa. When the temple in Nigeria, which city was it? Lagos? In Nigeria, there's a temple. It was the second temple in all of Africa and the first temple in West Africa. There was a lot of distance between those temples and the other temples. For the Philadelphia temple, we had temples a lot closer than those people did when the Philadelphia temple was built. South of us, there's the Washington, D.C. temple, which is in the Washington, D.C. suburbs. And north of us, there's a Manhattan temple. Manhattan, the borough of New York City. And to the east of us is the ocean. We don't have any floating temples. And to the west of us, I'm not sure what the closest temple to the west of us is. Do you accept other churches' baptisms? No. If you have already been baptized in any other church, Christian or otherwise, I don't know if they use, well, baptism is Anglicanizing of a Greek word for immersion. There are other religions, not only Christianity, that have ritual washing and or bathing or dipping in the water. But when you come to the conclusion that you want to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you need to get baptized again by us. Okay, a lot of the rooms in the temple are labeled as instruction rooms, and we are instructed there. So somebody asked me something like, is there instruction that occurs outside of the temple, or is it only inside of the temple? Well, we are instructed. We have classes and teaching that happens outside of the temple, in the chapels, in our own homes. So you don't need to think because you saw the word instruction room at the temple that Mormons aren't instructed or taught or learning anything outside of the temple, and we're going into the temple with a blank slate. Let's see. Who can perform temple weddings? Yep, those temple weddings that last forever, that happen in our temples. It's a calling, it's a position in the church to do those weddings. And we call the person a sealer. And that's all there is that could be said about that, really. It's not everybody who is a Mormon can perform those weddings. Anyone who is a Mormon in good standing can go into the temple to be married there, but to be the one performing it, you have to have a specific position in the church. Right, I was asked about the shoe coverings. At the open house, everyone has to wear shoe coverings, even the volunteers, even the janitors. And that has no religious significance. It's just to keep the thing cleaner and help there be less wear and tear on the flooring materials, as we have literally thousands of people, sometimes in one day thousands of people walking through it. What happens later? This person was wondering, are we going to be wearing those shoe coverings when it's only members of the church going into the temple? And here's what we do to keep the temple floor looking nice and to minimize the wear and tear on it. When we are performing ordinances in the temple, we wear shoes or slippers that we only wear in the temple. We put them on when we get to the temple dressing room, take them off when we're leaving the temple. And when somebody goes to the temple to watch somebody else get married, they just dress in their Sunday best. Don't put on special clothing for that. But there are places to put your shoes so that you're only walking with socks on the temple flooring and not putting the extra wear and tear of shoes being on the temple flooring. And the last question I put on this list, I think I got all the questions. Other than, of course, where do I go? That won't help you much now if I tell you which direction people had to go that were there to visit the temple. We talk about families being forever, but some people don't get along with their families. What about those people that don't get along with their families? Are going to have to be with their families forever. When I was younger, I've got brothers, I felt a very strong sibling rivalry with my older brother that I should not have felt. That was my fault. That was my weakness or error. I shouldn't have been as contentious as I was when I was younger. But now, depending on which political candidates my brother and I are talking about, now we get along much better. We get along great. We've matured. And when that older brother and I are rubbing shoulders in the celestial kingdom, in heaven, we will be even more mature then than we are now. So people who have trouble getting along with their families now, they will mature more when they get to heaven with their families forever, so that they will get along. Thank you for watching this video. To learn more about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, go to www.lds.org. That LDS, of course, is an abbreviation of Latter-day Saints. Or www.mormon.org. Have a good day.